topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the host and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
Well, good afternoon. Glad you could join us. Gosh, I remember not that long ago, as I was growing up, two things you couldn't talk about: politics and religion, right? Yeah, it was verboten. You couldn't talk about it. In today's America, the thing you can't talk about is what happened in the 2020 election. And, that creates quite a paradox and a quandary, especially when you got 60% of the country agreeing that something fishy happened in 2020. Can't fully explain it. It just doesn't seem right. There's sworn affidavits of over 1,000 witnesses witnessing illegality in the 2020 election. There's been something like 60 court cases that have taken place. Those on the left said that's proof that, in fact, the election was legitimate because the cases were taken to 60 judges and they were basically rejected. But of course, that's what they want us to believe. In some cases, it's complicated. You get into the technical deal of saying, well, you don't have standing. Some courts said, well, even if that was the case, when you look at the numbers, there wasn't enough numbers there to justify any alteration of the results, right? That's the typical argument that takes place. And it's also why some government officials, swear up and down there's no such thing as voter fraud. And certainly what happened in the 2020 elections, it was fraught with so many opportunities to cheat and steal an election. And this is evidenced by previous investigations that have been taking place, even by a former president of the United States, Jimmy Carter, as you might recall. Well, Joe Freed is back to talk about, what happened in the 2020 election and what we can do, because we're, less than 200 days away from the 2024 elections. And the people across the country, Joe Freed, have a lack of confidence that 2024 will be not much different than 2020. Welcome to the show. Good to have you with us, Joe.
Hey, Bill. Thanks so much for having me. I love being on your show because you know a lot about this subject. I just saw a poll earlier today. It was the biggest lead that Trump had so far over Biden. It was like 4 or 5 points nationally. And I said to my wife, I said, that doesn't mean anything. I said, I'm sorry, but I don't think it's enough. Maybe it's getting close to enough because you do run out of phony ballots after a certain point.
Yeah, you would hope.
Yeah, but I want to warn people that there's a lot of problems. And maybe I could, Bill, it's up to you. It's your show, but I could start by recapping why I believe absolutely there was fraud in 2020.
Okay, I want to do that. But before that, Joe, because this might be the first time people have seen your cherubic face and wonder, okay, who is this Joe Freed? Why does Bill Martinez keep having him on? And so let's talk about your background. I mean, you are a CPA of CPAs, so to speak.
Well, I just retired a couple of years ago, but I did 42 years in the field, and I was for the last 30 of those years, I was what they call a peer reviewer. I reviewed the standards and the quality of other CPA firms. And I estimated, there's so many, I didn't really have a count. I'd say around 1,000 times I did peer reviews for people. So we did our own audits, but we did that. Now, also, I was a governmental audit, government standards audit. So if somebody received money to rehabilitate their housing project from HUD, we were qualified to audit them to see if they complied with the standards of HUD or Health and Human Resources or OMB, the Office of Management and Budget, and all of that in accordance with GAO, which is Government Audit Standards. So, I have a lot of experience. And when I was sitting there after the election, I said to myself, wait a minute, There's a lot of theories going around. That was the time when all the anomalies were discussed.
Right.
Remember?
Yes.
How did Biden get 81 or 82 million votes when Barack Obama, in his best of the two elections, only got 69? That didn't ring true.
Right.
How did Trump win 18 of 19 bellwether counties, which for 10 elections in a row meant you won the whole election, but he didn't win the whole election, and so forth? There was a lot of those. Now, those are only anomalies. They don't prove who won, and I would never stop at that point, but they do inspire investigation, let's say.
Exactly. Yeah.
So the next thing you do as an auditor is you look at, we call that risk assessment. We look at the risk inside and outside of the organization. That would be risk assessment, those anomalies and other things.
Mm-hmm.
The second thing is the internal controls. Do they have voter ID? Well, none of the swing states had voter ID.
Right.
Do they have signature matching? Well, it turns out they didn't necessarily. In fact, let me just recap a couple states real quick. There's only three things that can give you confidence in any election: ID, signature matching. If it's done right, it's got to be done right, because otherwise it's kind of a joke.
Right.
The third thing is when those ballots come in and they're processing them, there's supposed to be a Republican and a Democrat and maybe an independent that's looking over the shoulders and saying, wait a minute, stop that one. I want to check that one out and make a record of it.
Right.
None of those three existed in Pennsylvania, not one. And what's really unbelievable is that, first of all, 10 years earlier, the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania said you can't have ID, even though they had passed it. It was going to be the law. And they say no ID in Pennsylvania, it's discriminatory. Okay, bad enough. But then that was good enough for 10 years. They were satisfied with that. But then when they see Trump running, the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania says, oh, we don't want signatures either. You can't have signature matching. And so there was no, they actually said that if somebody's signature does not match, you have to let them vote anyway.
Wow.
Right. But now here's the third one. That's not bad enough. So they get into Philadelphia, which is the epicenter of the Democrats there. I mean, the whole state is red, except for two counties, basically, Allegheny and Philadelphia. Philadelphia is the big one. Mm-hmm. And it swings. It's like the tail that swings the whole dog. I mean, everything swung by Philadelphia. And that's where, by the way, in the movie 2000 Mules, of all the states in the Philadelphia area, which they were monitoring, they said they estimated 275,000 phony harvested ballots.
Wow. Wow.
But you know, you're not allowed to say that anymore, because supposedly it's all been debunked. I don't believe it has been debunked at all. Mm-hmm. But anyway.
Yeah, just because you fail to investigate and affirm said numbers doesn't mean it's debunked. No. That's what they're saying. It's debunked, just like everything else about this election. They're telling us what we should believe, not what the truth is, right?
Yeah. Hey, there's my book.
There you go.
Well, listen, let me give an analogy. I like to give this analogy because this really will hit home to people. Because as an auditor, I stop right there. I say we can't certify. I'm not saying Trump won at that point. At that point, I wouldn't say Biden won or Trump won. I'd say those swing states that scrapped all the standards, all three of them, or even the first two, really, the signatures and the ID. If you don't do that, either one, we can't certify you, because you're changing the whole national election, and it's not honest.
Yeah, there's no credibility. Exactly.
Let's pretend that you're walking down the street and there's a storefront with a big glass window, and they got this giant jar of jelly beans. There's maybe tens of thousands of jelly beans in it. And it's got a sign that says $100,000 prize to whoever comes closest. And we're going to count these at the end of the month. But to participate, you got to pay $50 for a ticket. Right. So everybody's pouring their money in. And there's supposed to be 3 judges that are going to count the beans right in front of everybody on the last day of the month. And the day before, they say, "Oh no, we've got a communicable disease, COVID here. So we're just going to have one guy take the jar to the back room, and he's going to count it and let us know who won." And you say, "Oh, well, wait a minute, this is no good." He said, "Well, listen, if you don't think I did it right, we'll recount it in front of you." But the problem is, how do I know that the guy didn't add a few jelly beans in the back room or take a few out to make sure it was the number he wanted? Once you lose the chain of custody and the control, it's worthless. And that's what they were doing. And by the way, would people say, "Oh," he would say, "Yes, we recounted it and it came out right. So there's no fraud. So nobody gets their money back." Well, I'll tell you, there'd be about all those angry people would be marching to the court to say, "I want my money back. The guy cheated me. That's fraud." You see, we didn't have to have the recount. You had the fraud as soon as they changed the rules in a meaningful way. And that's what these did. But Bill, I take it the next step, because there is verifiable massive fraud, and it's there, but the press won't report it.
Exactly. That's the whole bottom line. We're talking with Joe Freed, CPA and auditor. His book, of course, we've talked about is, Debunked. I'll tell you, this is just what he's done. An auditor reviews the 2020 election and the lessons learned. Well, we would hope that we learned those lessons, Joe.
Yeah. Well, I don't think we have. Anyway, I could give you other examples. Michigan pulled the same nonsense, no ID. Jocelyn Benson, the Secretary of State, at the last minute said, "Oh, all you clerks out there in the counties, I want you to presume that the signatures match. Just presume that they match." Well, I noticed they lost them. And then when you got to Wayne County, which is Detroit, it was hellish. I mean, must be dozens and dozens of affidavits from people who said they were intimidated, physically afraid.
Exactly.
People with Black Lives Matters on their T-shirts, pushing them around, taking them out. They said that when they would take one of the Republicans out, the whole room, including the paid inspectors in the room, would all stand up and cheer. This was it was a complete joke.
What were they waiting for? Some conservative to be executed in the back room as they took him out? I mean, how ridiculous, right?
So ridiculous. Well, anyway, this is, let me see. Let me get to the concrete examples now, because I've just given you sort of the breaking of the rules. So I'm looking down here. I want to see here's a good one to start with.
Okay.
Pennsylvania voter deficit. Now, Bill, I'm not giving you a rough estimate. I'm giving you to the ballot.
Right.
202,377. 202,377. Now, that's way, way more than the margin for the winning margin for Biden. Way more.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And that was how many more ballots existed than identifiable voters on the day they certified the Pennsylvania election. So in Pennsylvania, they had a deficit of fewer voters than ballots of 202,377 on November 24th, which is when they certified. Now you can say, well, wait a minute. Maybe by the time January 6th came around and there was all that commotion, everything was settled. No, It wasn't. And even if you go beyond that to February 1st of 2021, so now we're months past the election.
Right.
It was 121,000, still way more than Biden's winning margin. Now, you would probably say to me, well, Joe, that's not possible, because if what you're saying is true, it would all be known by now. Well, believe it or not, I told you I was supposed to testify, for example, in John Eastman's case, that when he was up for disbarment. Judge wouldn't let me. She wouldn't let. It wasn't just me. There were like 10 people, and I was in esteem. I was the bad guy. I mean, they had a state justice on their Supreme Court that wouldn't let them in. Justice Gableman, they did let in, but with restrictions, because he was, according to the judge, not an expert. Here's Here's his background. Not only
that's crazy. You don't want an expert. Okay, that's great. Okay. Right.
He was not only an expert on the court because he was a justice, but then he conducted the audit of Wisconsin right after the election. He's the one that ran the audit of Wisconsin and found all sorts of things. But he's not an expert that can comment on. And one thing I learned, Bill, if you're not an expert, you're nothing. Because in these courts, what they say is you can't give an opinion. So the other side gives their opinion, like Secretary of State, she's an expert. So she gives her opinion, even though, by the way, they have no quantitative backgrounds. You know, these are activist attorneys that work for like a George Soros organization.
Exactly.
They come in and they're experts and they say everything was fine. And you come in, and as soon as Michael Gableman would try to give an opinion, the judge would shout him down. It's sort of like these judges you're seeing with Trump now.
Exactly.
You're not, you know what she said at one point? She said to the attorney for Eastman, she said, you better take Mr. Gableman in the back room for 5 minutes to straighten him out. It's unbelievable. I mean, they're the judge.
Oh my God.
So poor John Eastman, he never got his witnesses. I mean, it was like, I was ready to say all sorts of things. I couldn't say them. And there were others. I was just one of, like I say, maybe 10, 12 people who never got qualified to give an opinion in that. So
we talk about a gag order. I mean, it's one thing to have a gag order outside of the court, but when you have a gag order inside the court, I mean, how is that justice?
Well, let's talk about that outside of the court too, because what the journalists say, they do these fact checks, and when they check the deficit, the voter deficit I just talked about in Pennsylvania, they say that's not true. We interviewed so-and-so and so-and-so, and they said that Joe Freed or whoever it is, they don't understand how elections work. And so it's debunked. They put pants on fire. Right. It's been debunked. But it's not true. It's a matter of counting it. I mean, it's right there. Count those things. We can show you that you didn't have them, but they won't do it. They know they can't do it. So they won't do it. And they'll just hide behind the aura of their office. They have the trappings of respectability. They're the Secretary of State. They're the head of elections for Michigan or Pennsylvania or whatever. So there's that. Let me see. I'll get you another one. Oh, gee, there's some beauties. Yeah. Georgia, they have found out that in Georgia, there's in Fulton County, first of all, just came out in the last few months. There was no signature matching at all. They lied about it. Brad Raffensperger, the Secretary of State, kept saying, remember that hour-long conversation with Trump and Raffensperger that they leaked the audio out?
Exactly.
Right. Well,
the one he said, can you find me 11,000 votes? That has him in court right now. Exactly.
Right. And by the way, he didn't say, will you fabricate them? He said, find them, because he had just laid out like 300,000. And after they leave that part out. Right before that, he said, well, there's 5,000 here, and there's 10,000 here, and 50,000 here. All I need is 11,000. Yeah. Well, they left all that preface out, so it sounds like he's just saying, just make them up, you know.
Right.
But anyway, what was that? Because Georgia, they had Raffensperger claimed that he was not doing a signature test in Fulton, because there were no problems in Fulton, but there were problems in Cobb County. Well, I don't know. Let me put it this way. I live near Cleveland. In Cleveland, when you get in Cleveland, you are in high blue territory. This is all Democrat territory.
Right.
When
exactly.
you get to the suburbs, like where I live, it leans a little to the right.
Okay.
It's Cobb County leans to the right. It's not Fulton County, which is a joke. And it turns out now we know Fulton County, it came out with Wingate. There's testimony that we never heard until recently. And I think his name is Mike Wingate. He testified, he was on the board of elections, and he said, no, we never did signature matching in Fulton. So.
And what does the state law call for?
They're supposed to match this. Well, Here's the thing. This is interesting. Remember, I said that Jocelyn Benson, we're talking Michigan, right? I have to be careful. I go from one state to the other so fast. She said to presume that they match. Mm-hmm. So that's why Trump was irate. He said, well, I want you to check these signatures because they didn't really test them. And so Raffensperger said, okay, we just did Cobb County. Everything was fine. And Trump was saying, why are you doing Cobb County? I wanted Fulton County. Well, here's why they didn't do Fulton, because Fulton, they didn't even look at the signatures at all. There was nothing. Oh. But Michigan statewide, do you know how many ballots I did the math on this, by the way. Do you know how many ballots they rejected for having a bad signature statewide?
How many?
1 in every 2,500.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, 1 in 2,500. It probably should have been 1 in 250, which would have completely altered the election. In Georgia, though, they found voter GA found all sorts of bad issues. They had impossible. They call it in Fulton. This is all in Fulton County, not Georgia, really. It's Fulton County is the epicenter, and they had ballots that are impossible because cyber-wise, they're impossible. They have an image file and an authentication file, which are created simultaneously. And they discovered that a lot of the authentication files came hours or even days later were tacked in there. It was obviously some sort of crazy cover-up. They had 4,000 ballots that had the exact same, these are scanned ballots, scanned images.
Right.
4,000 that had the exact same timestamp. How does that happen? It takes a full second to scan a ballot. It should take over an hour, but they all have exactly the same timestamp. They had around 350,000 no images at all for in-person voting. They had 17,700 that were from the recount, and there were no images at all, which is almost impossible because the image, see what they do is they take the ballot, they scan it, which creates an image, a TIFF file, that's the image, and the SHA file, that's the authentication file. And then they use that to cast the ballot, which will say, there's a vote for Biden or there's a vote for Trump. Well, they got the vote for Biden, but there's no image file. How did they get it? So there's all these crazy problems. And the numbers are huge. We're talking like 45 times the winning margin. This is enormous problems in Georgia, Wisconsin. I talk about that one in my article that we were, today.
Right.
The democracy in the park, where they had 206 locations where in Democrat areas where they had these boxes. I think they were like cardboard boxes or anything open. There was no security at all. People could throw their ballots in and they would help them fill them out and transport them and all this stuff. So anyway, I'm rambling on about, but there's all sorts of examples. Arizona, you had 2 very well-constructed signature tests from Shiva Ayyadurai. The first one, he had 6 people, 3 of whom were professional document examiners, and the other 3 were lay people.
Right.
They looked at hundreds of signatures, samples, and they unanimously said these 12% do not match. 12% do not match. Now, if you extend that to the mail-in voting population, that's 200,000 in an election decided by 10,000. 27 times the winning margin. So when people say there's no evidence of fraud, there's massive evidence of fraud. Massive. And I just named 4 states: Wisconsin, Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Pennsylvania. I guess 5 states. I'm whipping through them fast. And I know I'm jumping around and I'm skipping some of the stuff, but believe me, every one of those, you can make the case that they're completely illegitimate.
Well, the other thing too, Joe, what this reeks of is a conspiracy. To have this coordinated in these swing states in the manner in which they did. Yeah. Sending, Democratic operatives, Mark Elias and his band of married Democratic legal beagles, putting pressure on state houses, all in the name of COVID and everything, to really rig the system. I mean, I don't know if we'll ever get to that point. Kind of like it took Deep Throat almost, right before he died, that we could finally found out who Deep Throat was in Watergate.
Yeah.
I don't know if that'll be the same thing here in this particular case, but there's too many anomalies. There's too many red flags flying up there. And of course, the courts so far have not wanted to address these issues. And it's unfortunate because, our democracy is based on our democratic republic, and Constitution is based on the consent of the governed. You don't have the consent of the governed. If you have this conspiracy that's taken place, and clearly somebody orchestrated this, Joe.
Yeah.
There was somebody, in the main chair that was telling everybody, I mean, just one thing, just alone, I'm going to have everybody shut down the count at exactly the same time. We're going to make up an excuse, say there was a plumbing problem or whatever they came up with. They shut down all at the same time.
Yeah.
What was that about?
I could never get to it's very suspicious. I put that in the category of the anomalies, like the bellwethers and the fact that Biden got such a big margin. And there were all sorts of things like that. But that's where I put, because the truth is I dug hard. I wanted to get to the bottom of that when I wrote Debunked. And I really, it's impossible almost. It's like they didn't keep good records. They would say, well, yeah, the New York Times shows this, but that's from Edison, our company that does that. And they made a mistake, so they had to reverse it. And that's why it looked like Trump went down. And you get all this malarkey.
Right.
I couldn't make heads. I couldn't pin it down. But I will say one thing. You talk about a conspiracy. It's going to be worse next time. That's what I want to tell people. Let me tell you a couple examples of why it's going to be worse. First of all, in Michigan, now let me say I've got it. Maybe I got it up on my screen here. But in Michigan, here it is. Okay. They passed a constitutional amendment. This was slick. They act like they're giving voters a Bill of Rights for voters. It is it's a Bill of Rights for George Soros and for Jocelyn Benson, the Secretary of State. I'll just read a couple things to you. This is what Michigan did. This is why Michigan's going to be so hard to win this time. They, first of all, we recognize your fundamental right to vote without harassment. Now, what that's about is they're so mad that people were trying to monitor the drop boxes, and they'd stand there and they'd have their goon squad come and threaten them with arrest and get them out. So now they're making it explicit that if you are monitoring one of those boxes, you're going to go to jail. Okay, that's what that's about. Then another one, I love this. I love the way they worded it.
But they're not offering any remedy themselves to monitor the boxes, right? They're just leaving them out there solely
they don't think there's a need for they don't think there's a need for a remedy. This is if you put a remedy, you're stifling.
Admitting, you're admitting there's a problem. Yeah, exactly.
Well, here's another one. I love this. Provide voter right. The voter has the right to verify his identity with a photo ID or a signed statement. So, let me see. I could just write my name there and I'm okay. Or I can go and get a photo ID and submit it to you. I mean, why would you put that alternative? Obviously, you're just saying all you need is a signature. No ID is required anymore. And you can't, in other words, what they're really saying is nobody's allowed to ask for an ID, period. Any ID.
Well, and especially in light of the fact that we've got 10 million migrants in the country that are here illegal. And all you got to do is sign, and you don't necessarily even have to go to a polling station because today's Democratic Party, they come to you. I mean, they're
you just hit on another thing, and that's the AVR, automatic voter registration, is swept through about 22 or 3 Democrat-led states already. This is another warning. I'm telling you, Republicans out there, be careful, because this is going to change everything. What they've always had this thing where if you go to register your car, you can be asked, do you want to register to vote or not? And you're supposed to only say yes if you're a citizen.
Right.
Here's the big changes. There's two huge changes to that in all these Democrat states. One, it doesn't take the Department of Motor Vehicles. Like in Michigan now, when the moment you're released from prison, you have been registered, whether
Right.
you know it or not. And that's the other thing. And by the way, it's not just prisons. It's you get welfare, Medicaid benefit, any touching of the state government, you're automatically get registered in a lot of these states. It varies a little bit from state to state.
Mm-hmm.
But the other thing is they have what they call, like in Michigan, a back end registration process, which means the front end is a little more honest because they say to you, oh, you're here, you're getting released from prison. And if you wish, we will register you to vote. They tell you up front.
Right.
The back end says nothing. They just register you. And then in a few days or maybe a few weeks, you get a little postcard that says, oh, by the way, you're registered. If you don't want to be registered, just fill out this form and send it back. What they're going to do is create armies of people who don't know they're registered, but the political operatives will absolutely know they're registered.
Of course, they've got that. They got all that information. Sure.
Anybody can get it. You can buy it, or sometimes it's $50. Sometimes it's $15,000. It all varies with the state, but they have that information. So they say, oh my God, there's hundreds of thousands of new, and they've already got them right away in days. They got hundreds of thousands of extra people that don't necessarily know they're voting, or if they do, they're not intending to vote. And this is like the food for the rats. This is cheese for the rats to come, eat the cheese and vote. And that's what they're going to do. That's why this is another thing that makes this election harder than the 2020 election. This has mostly happened in the last 4 years.
Exactly.
Let me get back to this Michigan real quick. Am I running?
Well, let me just say this, Joe Freed. I just want to remind everybody we're talking with Joe Freed. He's a CPA, nationally recognized auditor of auditors, so he knows how to add numbers. Okay, he's a smart guy, well qualified to deal and address this issue of voter fraud, and he's bringing up the facts. And as you've heard me say time and again, in the absence of fact opinion rules, and the left has been doing everything, the Obama administration has been doing everything they can to squash the truth, to squash the facts, so that this narrative that they've been putting out there and telling us that we should believe that Joe Biden got over 80 million votes, and Donald Trump, though he got 10 more million votes, which was unprecedented of a sitting president, to get 10 million more votes and lose, it defies credulity on its face. And this is why you have such a high percentage, a majority of Americans saying, look, they don't know that it was a free and fair election, that they doubt that they doubt in the credibility and the numbers that were presented to us. And it's in a situation now where we can't talk about it. I mean, there's some networks you can't even say that they won't even put you on the air, Joe, if you were to say that you didn't believe that the 2020 election was free and fair.
Some networks, that's Newsmax. Even Newsmax is the only decent channel, and they won't let you say that. And of course, Fox won't. Right. You know, Bill, I contacted you before we came on, and I said, Bill, is it okay for me to talk about? I was worried for you because you know how it is. I mean, it's a crazy world out there.
Well, we pursue the truth no matter where it leads, Joe. I believe we owe that to our constituents, to our viewers here, because nobody else is talking about this, but yet people are frustrated. And maybe, at home, talking to their spouse, or if they're, they understand they're in safe territory. I mean, I navigate around those rough waters, and I can tell pretty quickly. I mean, I was speaking last week with a former ambassador, and right away, I mean, he told me that he believed that it was legitimate, that, he says, look, there's been 60 cases gone before the court, and they all agreed that there was no there. I said, that's not true.
No,
and you can address that, Joe, that, what was the actual, I mean, some of this stuff was, the courts just did not want to deal with it because they said, oh, suppose they didn't have standing, whatever that meant. It was all on a technical issue. But yet there were some courts. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say there's a website called Promoting American Election Integrity. John Droz, D-R-O-Z, handles that. And he did a great job. And I'm not saying it just because it comes out in a certain way. Every single case he puts on there is reference to MIT's Healthy Election Project, where they give an actual synopsis with lawyers of the case. And there's 92 cases. And of the 92, only 30 were decided on merit. And of the 30, Trump won 22. Now, I will concede to you something. I mean, that's a little misleading because some of those that were dismissed probably would have lost on merit, like Sidney Powell had a real dog of a case. She had a great case and a terrible case mixed together. The great case is she had all these people who could attest to actual harassment and fraud in Wayne County. But then she got a little far out with the Dominion stuff and where she was out over her skis, where she couldn't really support it. We have, by the way, gotten more support for that lately. You know, you probably, I'm sure you're aware of Haldeman and the 5-second treatment. He took a pen from someone.
He took a pen, exactly. Yeah.
So it does show you. I will say this. I'm going to say it to. This is not coming from Bill. This is coming from Joe Frieden Dominion. If you want to sue somebody. You apparently have a garbage for your machinery. I'm not saying you fixed any election, but apparently your machinery is total garbage from what I've heard. It's going back years ago when Texas evaluated Dominion and rejected it. They said it was so weak. This is back about 4 or 5 years ago, and Texas was thinking of buying Dominion machines. They said, we're not buying them. There's too many security problems.
Exactly.
But now Haldeman's proved it.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, to me, Joe, is that, Dominion even goes before, it goes to Capitol Hill and goes before Congress. And, they were, saying that they had no internet connection. There was no way that any information could travel over the internet. But yet when one of the, I think it was Senator Rand Paul or another senator looked in the machine and says, well, what is this? This is a modem. A modem means you can't connect to the internet. So they flat out lied. And I just,
I know Pat Kolbeck in Michigan was big on that. That might be the guy you're thinking about.
Right.
He was talking about that. He's kind of a cyber tech guy. But anyway, I was just going to show you 2 more things on Michigan if we got the time.
Yeah, we've got time. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. Because this is so dishonest. I just want you to see it. Here's part of their constitution. It's in their constitution now. Allow donations to fund elections. In other words, they're saying George Soros and what's his name, Zuckerberg, bring your money. We're going to use it, all the money you want to bring to us. And this is the best of all. Only election officials can audit their elections. So Secretary of State Benson, a flaming super hard Democrat, is the only one that gets to audit or even to handle their materials. If you were to say, we'd like to do an audit of your election, they're saying, oh, I'm sorry, our Constitution doesn't allow anybody to do an audit except Jocelyn Benson. She's going to do the audit. This is so corrupt, it's unbelievable. So that's the problem. That's an example of a problem, Michigan. Another example, we talked about AVRs, the automatic voter registration, all these hundreds of thousands of people who will be registered and not even know it anymore. The Democrats are doing their work. They're doing their thing and they're expanding on it.
Exactly.
So we're in trouble.
Well, we see that Laura Trump, now that she's one of the co-chairs of the RNC, she announced, I think it was last week before, that they've hired 100,000 operatives, to focus on the swing states, to be on top of voter integrity. That was a breath of fresh air. This was something the Republican Party needed to do a long time ago, right?
Very much. And I do have some connection to the J6 legal stuff. I can't talk about it, but just to say that I planned, now that's wonderful. I am pushing this canvassing idea, and I put it out, and somebody already responded. I've had some responses, and some people say, well, Joe, first of all, that's all after the election, right? Well, yeah, I mean, we'll try to keep it honest before the election, but you got to try it everywhere. I mean, at every point you got to fight. And if we get to the point where we think they've stolen an election on us, we have to have a way of fighting it.
Exactly.
I don't know.
Explain to the audience what you mean by canvassing, Joe. You and I talked about this before. Go ahead.
All right, here it is. This is what I'm pitching. I'm trying to pitch it to the Trump people too. After the election, within days, don't wait too long, you have to get the voter roll. Every state will give it to you or sell it to you. And it will tell you who's registered. It will also tell you who was sent a mail-in ballot. That's where all the fraud is, by the way, the mail-in. Right. Forget the in-person. They're honest. And then it'll tell you who returned the mail-in ballot. So you got here are the registered voters. Here are the mail-in ballots that were sent. Here are the mail-in ballots that were returned. Okay, now you get a qualified statistician. It's got to be a guy with credentials because we're building for a court case at this point. As the election's over, you're trying to amass material for a court case to get a new election, basically. Right. This is like the bottom line. And the statistician might, depending on the size of the county, maybe he'll say 500, 600, 1,000 homes that that are representative of the whole county. And we're going to have an army of volunteers knock on doors, and they're going to be managed by some very elite people. You want to have like maybe a retired judge and attorneys, maybe a doctor, different people from the community that have credibility, maybe recognizable people. Maybe it would be a Bill Martinez, but somebody who has credibility. Right. And they would select these volunteers and supervise the volunteers. Now, and by the way, all this, if people want, they can go to my Substack and they will see it in writing.
Exactly.
Okay. I hope you don't hear that. My damn phone, I should shut it off. But I'll just let it go. So they monitor these people, and they're going to ask a standard set of questions. The questions have to be asked in the same order, the same way. And I recommended like 6 questions on my article. So if people go to Joe Freed, cpa.substack.com, they'll see that article and they'll see what I'm recommending, but it could be different. I mean, I'm not necessarily have the bottom line on this, but then you see what your response is. Now I mentioned there was an informal one done in Maricopa County. It was done months too late. It didn't. Right. It couldn't be used as evidence. If you do it late, first of all, the election's already certified. You won't get it opened again. Secondly, people's memories do fade, and they're going to say that. They're going to say, "Oh, these people forgot. They did request it. They did fill it out. They just forgot." But you get that. You also get signed affidavits, whatever you can. So if somebody says, and by the way, the experience of the 2 I cite, I don't know if I cite them both, but there's 2 I know of that tried to do this in one in Michigan and one in Arizona. And in both cases, they got angry people who were irate when they learned that people were voting for them. They were glad to fill out an affidavit. They said, I want to fill out an affidavit because somebody voted for me. And I know I didn't vote. I haven't voted in 10 years or something like that. Exactly. So you get that, you go to court. And if you have a big enough percentage, and the one I cite in the article had 5.7%, in an election, that was like 8 times the winning margin, which was only 0.7%.
Exactly.
So
yeah. Right.
A big margin of people who said, I didn't cast that vote. This is very significant. And this is what we have to be prepared to do. But it takes advanced planning. And I'm trying to sound the alarm, tell people, call your representatives if you're in a swing state, or send them forward my article or something, but try to get them to prepare.
Well, like you say, Joe, this has got to be all hands on deck, and we have to attack this issue from a myriad of directions, you know, before, during, and after. That would seem to make sense, because if the cheaters understand that you have this kind of vigilance to
Yes.
ensure the integrity of our vote, then they've got to up their game, or and of course they may be spoiled because they got away. They were so overt with the cheating that they did in 2020 and got away with it. They may be just so arrogant to think that it doesn't matter. They're just going to do as they darn well please anyway, right?
That's right. Well, listen, Bill, I don't want to act like the only thing we can do is wait till the election's over. There are some things to do up front. Do you want me to talk about a few?
Yeah, we've got 4 minutes left. Go ahead.
Okay. All right. In the last 4 minutes, let me try to do that. Offer a reward for, there's 6 swing states I cover in debunked. Those are the critical 6, but I expand that to 10 swing states that are close in my second book. And by the way, people, if you're going to buy a book, buy Debunked. It's the better book. I make more money on the other one, but I'd rather you buy Debunked because that's my substantial reference. The other one is sort of like a checklist. It's more like that's how elections are stolen is a checklist of things. It's good too, but the comprehensive book is Debunked.
Right.
Okay. In 9 of the 10 swing states, it's still on the books that harvesting is illegal. Now, the Democrats don't want to enforce that, but it's technically on the books. So what you do is you put out public announcements and you say, listen, people, if somebody approaches you and wants to don't hand them your ballot. That's illegal.
Right.
It's either a felony or a misdemeanor, depending on the state. Don't engage in illegal conduct. Report him. Because if he's arrested and convicted, you get $10,000. Put a big dollar. You know how that's going to put a chill in some operations where they're afraid that their buddy who's harvesting with them is going to call the cops. Well, that's the next thing. Don't call the cops. Call the sheriff. A lot of these states have conservative sheriffs that will really do something. They're not like the blue state they're not DAs. They can't actually prosecute the case, but they're like the police for the county versus the police for the city.
Right.
Those city policemen, first of all, they have bigger problems probably, but they also don't necessarily, they're often woke also. The police force, they're making all the police forces into woke organizations, and they won't prosecute this stuff. So they won't report it even and the prosecutor won't do anything with it. But the sheriff can make a big stink about it, and it'll make it hard for them. That's exactly what happened in Wisconsin with those nursing homes. The sheriff Schmaling, to his credit, he made a big stink about these people who were incapacitated, 104 years old in a coma, and they were voting for Biden.
Exactly.
He reported it. So first, I say is public announcements, warning for months. They should start those right now. Don't let your ballot be harvested. Don't give it to anybody. You can't take an inducement. It's illegal to take a raffle ticket for it or to take a gift card for it. Don't let them do that. It's illegal. But if you report those, you might make $10,000. That would be a better way. Now, the Democrats will be in court the next morning saying somehow everything's always intimidation, right?
It's voter suppression. Suppression that you're reminding people of the law of the land, right? Or in their state.
It's really harvester suppression, but they'll call it voter suppression. You're right. Absolutely. Yeah. So that's another thing. Now, I used to recommend monitoring the drop boxes a little bit, but they're really if you do it, don't have first of all, don't carry a weapon, even if it's a concealed carry state, because they'll definitely crush you on that. Don't have a big camera in front of you too. Be very discreet. If possible, go way back and monitor with some high-tech cameras, or else have the little ones that you can't even, like a little lapel camera.
Exactly. Yeah.
Because they're just ready. They'll say intimidation. You can't take a picture of anybody. So that's another thing to do. Something that's going on. Here's a cheerful note, Bill. There's a lot of organizations cleaning up registrations now, and that is a wonderful thing. They're going through the registration list and trying to weed them out with get the dead people off, get the obsolete people, the people who have moved out.
Right.
but it will never be enough. I mean, you might, instead of having an extra 1 million people, you have an extra 500,000 people. It's but it's worth doing. I mean, in the long run, you have to do that too. So that's another thing to be done, and they're doing it. There's
exactly.
Yeah.
Well, Joe, we've got to leave it there. Again, I cannot thank you enough, for participating and bringing us up to date. Remind everyone how they can connect with you through your Substack.
Yeah, please go to Joe Fried. It's like fried. So Joe Fried CPA.substack.com. And it's a free subscription. There's got to be at least 50 articles up there already. It's focused mostly on elections. It's from a conservative perspective, I guess, but it's always free. It will always be free. I'm not in this to make money, believe me, on this stuff. So I just want to sound the alarm and get people educated on some of the stuff that I've learned.
Exactly.
Bill,
well,
thanks so much.
Thank you so much for being with us. Well, it was the murderous communist dictator Joseph Stalin who said this about elections. It doesn't matter who votes. It only matters who counts the votes. Joe Fried has been here to remind us how important it is to make sure that we have a free and fair election. It is the consent of the governed, which is foundational to this democratic republic. Thank you so much for being with us. Thank you for sharing your time. Hope you enjoyed the show, took some notes, and maybe you're a lot smarter and more, more vigilant about protecting the integrity of your vote. It starts with your vote. It is a personal issue, no doubt. Thank you. Again, may God bless you and keep you. May he make his face shine upon you. May he be gracious unto you and give you his peace. Have a great day. God bless. Thank you for being with us.